Hey, my name is Steve and I'm not a luthier, but I built this guitar without a lot of knowledge about how to do that. If I can do this, anyone can. My daughter gave me an amazing gift for Christmas. It's this guitar. It's a kit. It's an electric guitar kit for a hollow body, like a Gibson Les Paul knockoff. It's just basically parts. And I've got to figure out how to make all this work as a musical instrument. And I've never really built a guitar before. I've never built a guitar before. I'm documenting this just for posterity, and if I do it and it comes out cool, then it's just evidence that anybody can do this. The process begins with a lot of sanding. I started with a 220 grit sandpaper and worked my way up with a 320, 400, and eventually a 600 grit sandpaper. It was all done by hand and very lightly. Nothing complicated here, it's just sanding. I masked the neck joint to keep it clean. It will glue better that way later. After I finished sanding, I cleaned it up with some mineral spirits and masked the outside. Then I applied a fairly generous coat of an ebony stain dye. This made me a little nervous because it was not the intended color of the guitar. This was a technique I found online and I was just following instructions. As you wipe off the stain, you begin to see the amazing grain pattern in that flame maple top. I eventually covered the entire body and the neck with the ebony stain dye. The bindings cleaned up nicely with nail polish remover. I also masked the fretboard because I didn't want ebony stain dye on the rosewood. After letting the stain dry, I began sanding it all off again. Sanding it off removes the color while leaving it only in the deep grain. You really want to be careful sanding here because you're sanding a very thin veneer and it's possible to sand all the way through. I did that in a couple of spots around the edges. It wasn't a complete disaster, but it's an imperfection. After sanding, I wiped it clean with mineral spirits another time. I also masked around the outside edge again. I applied blue dye over the sanded black. What I was hoping to achieve was an electric blue color. I had to apply 2 coats of the blue dye to get the color that I wanted. At this point, it really started looking the way that I had planned for it to. And the places around the outside edge where I had sanded too deep became less visible with the blue stain. Before applying the lacquer coats, I did one more pass of sanding with 600 grit sandpaper just to smooth it all out one more time. I did this on the back of the body as well as the neck. Then I wiped it all down with mineral spirits one more time to remove any dust. Applying the mineral spirits at this point puts a nice shine on it and gives you a little bit of an idea of what the finished product is going to look like. I draped off a corner of my basement for a paint room. This is a really bad idea. There's really no place for the fumes to escape to. I used actual coat hangers to hang the neck and body while they're being sprayed with lacquer. I did 3 light coats of lacquer at a time. I waited a couple of days and then scuffed the surface with quadruple zero steel wool. Then 3 more lacquer coats. I did this over and over again until I had a total of 12 lacquer coats. This gave the guitar a nice shine, but it didn't give it the glassy finish that you usually see on guitars. Wet sanding with a very fine sandpaper instead of scuffing with steel wool would have given it that finish. I was still happy with the way this finish turned out. Before putting the final coat of lacquer on, I glued the neck to the body using Type Bond wood glue. I took a lot of precautions to protect the finish on the back and the fretboard to make sure I didn't do any damage when I clamped them down. After the final coat of lacquer was applied, it was time to assemble the guitar, starting with the tuning pegs on the neck. Mounting these is pretty self-explanatory, and the hardware is pretty simple. You want to be careful not to tighten the bolts too tight, as you may damage the finish. A deep well socket should give you enough torque to tighten that properly without the ratchet. Next, install the inserts for the bridge. You can tap those in gently with a rubber mallet. You can screw in the mounts for the bridge and finger tighten. Do the same with the tailpiece. All that's left to do now is the wiring, which is my greatest deficiency in this process. I wish I had a lot of insight that I could give you about doing this. All I can say is find a good wiring diagram that you understand how to read and follow it. I was able to get it wired well enough that when I plugged it in, it played properly and sounded pretty good. One of the tone knobs didn't work properly, so I took it to a repair guy and he took care of that for me. With this particular type of guitar, all of the wiring is done outside of the guitar. Then you will need to find a creative way to fish the components through the F-holes and up into the holes where they belong. There is a YouTuber named Dan from Guns and Guitars that has a pretty good method for doing this using clear rubber tubing that you can get at Walmart or a pet store. There are lots of helpful resources online that you can use to find information about the wiring process that will give you a lot better information than I will. Be patient. If you find a process that doesn't work for you, go find another one. There's always another way to get it done. It didn't turn out too bad for a guy that had no idea what he was doing when he began. It was very gratifying to play a guitar that I had built with my own two hands. I'm not an expert at this by any means. I'm just a guy who likes to work with his hands. If I can do this, anyone can. Thanks for watching. If you found this information helpful, please like and subscribe. And please leave comments about what I can do better.